Marcus Chen's hands trembled as he read the official notice displayed on the communal holoboard in Sector 7's Central Plaza. The words seemed to burn themselves into his retinas. By order of the Galactic Commerce Authority, all unclaimed juvenile entities residing in designated care facilities will be transferred to authorized labor procurement agencies for rehabilitation and productive integration into society. The bureaucratic language couldn't hide what everyone knew this really meant. The orphans were being sold. Marcus crushed the printed copy he'd managed to grab before security drones cleared the area. Around him, other humans shuffled away with downcast eyes, shoulders slumped in defeat. This was just another day in the Terran administrative zone, another reminder of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. They were a conquered species, barely above the status of domesticated animals in the eyes of their alien overlords. But Marcus wasn't like the others. Where they saw inevitable defeat, he saw a problem that needed solving. Where they accepted their fate, he plotted resistance. The hegemony had made one crucial error in their assessment of humans. They assumed that broken spirits meant broken minds. The hegemony controlled most of the known galaxy through a combination of overwhelming military might and economic stranglehold. Humans had been integrated into their civilization 57 years ago, after a brief and decisively one-sided war. Earth now served as a mining and agricultural world, its population carefully managed to provide optimal resource extraction. Orphan children were considered excess inventory, mouths to feed with no immediate economic value. Marcus made his way through the crowded streets toward the industrial district where he worked. The city's architecture reflected the hegemony's aesthetic preferences, towering spires of crystal and metal that seemed to grow organically from the ground, connected by graceful bridges that defied human understanding of physics. Beautiful, alien, and utterly indifferent to human comfort or needs. The orphanage sat on the border between the residential and industrial sectors, a squat gray building that had once been a human elementary school. Marcus had been volunteering there for 3 years, ever since the death of his wife Sarah had left him with too much time and too much grief. The children had helped fill the hollow space in his chest, even as his own 8-year-old daughter Emma tried her best to pretend she didn't notice her father crying when he thought she wasn't looking. Director Kralthak was waiting for him in the facility's main office. The Vectani administrator was a tall, reptilian creature with scales that shifted color based on emotional state. Currently, those scales displayed the muted blues and grays of bureaucratic resignation. Mr. Chen, Kralthak's translator, rendered his speech in flat, mechanical English. I assume you have seen the notification. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Through the office's reinforced window, he could see children playing in the courtyard. 43 kids between the ages of 6 and 16, all that remained of families destroyed by industrial accidents, disease, or the simple grinding poverty that was the lot of most humans in the hegemony. The transport arrives in 6 days, Kralthak continued. The children will be processed at the central facility on Zirian Prime, then distributed to various labor contractors based on their assessed capabilities and market demand. The clinical language made Marcus's stomach turn. What kind of labor? The documentation is not specific. Agricultural work, manufacturing, domestic service, entertainment venues. The administrator's scales flickered briefly to orange, indicating discomfort with the topic. The mortality rates in the first year typically range from 15 to 40%, depending on the assignment. Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Mortality rates. The juvenile human physiology requires a period of adjustment to non-Terran environments and work schedules. This is considered an acceptable cost of integration. 43 children. Some of them Marcus had known since they were toddlers. Little Zara, who still sucked her thumb when she thought no one was looking. Tommy, the 12-year-old math prodigy who built impossible structures out of scrap metal. Maria, 16 and fierce, who'd been protecting the younger kids since her parents died in the methane plant explosion. There must be alternatives, Marcus said. Adoption procedures, extended care programs, something. Kralthak's scales shifted to a darker blue. Mr. Chen, I understand your emotional attachment to these juveniles. However, the economic reality is clear. The cost of maintaining non-productive individuals exceeds the allocated budget. The hegemony has provided a solution that ensures the children will contribute meaningfully to society. By working them to death in alien factories. By providing them with purpose and structure. The administrator's tone remained perfectly neutral. I would advise against emotional rhetoric, Mr. Chen. Such attitudes are noted in citizenship evaluation reports. The threat was subtle but clear. Step out of line, and Marcus could find himself and Emma on the next transport to the labor redistribution centers. He forced himself to nod and mumble something about understanding the necessity. But, as he left the office and walked among the children during their afternoon recreation period, Marcus's mind was racing. The hegemony's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. It was a vast, interconnected system that relied on predictable behavior from its component parts. Humans were expected to accept their assigned roles, work their allocated shifts, and die quietly when they became too expensive to maintain. Marcus had spent 3 years studying that system from the inside. His day job involved maintaining the data networks that connected the various industrial facilities in Sector 7. He'd noticed things: security protocols that relied on alien psychology, shipping schedules that followed predictable patterns, communication networks that assumed no one would be clever enough to exploit their vulnerabilities. The hegemony had made another error in their assessment of humans. They'd classified Marcus as a technical maintenance specialist, grade 7, suitable for routine equipment repair and data entry. They'd never bothered to investigate his background before the conquest, never learned that he'd once been Dr. Marcus Chen, professor of computer science at MIT, with a specialty in distributed systems architecture and encryption. That night, Marcus tucked Emma into bed in their assigned housing unit, a cramped 2-room apartment that was considered adequate for their family classification. She'd been quieter than usual during dinner, picking at her protein ration and stealing glances at her father's face. "Dad," she said as he turned to leave. "Are you okay?" Marcus paused at the door. Emma had Sarah's eyes, dark and perceptive, and sometimes she seemed to see right through him. "Just tired, sweetheart. Go to sleep." "Is it about the orphanage? Tommy told me something bad was happening there." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Tommy lived 2 units down with his elderly grandmother. The kids in the sector all knew each other, all looked out for each other in the way that children do when the adults in their lives are struggling just to survive. "Don't worry about it," Marcus said. "Everything's going to be okay." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. Emma was only 8 years old. She shouldn't have to carry the weight of the universe's indifference on her small shoulders. After she fell asleep, Marcus sat at his workstation and began to plan. The hegemony's data networks were protected by quantum encryption algorithms that would take conventional computers millions of years to crack. But Marcus wasn't planning a conventional attack. He was planning to use the system's own assumptions against it. The first step was reconnaissance. Over the next 3 days, Marcus used his legitimate access credentials to map the communication pathways between the orphanage, the transport scheduling system, and the labor redistribution centers. He traced data flows, identified key nodes, and began to build a complete picture of how the child selling operation actually worked. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The system was mostly automated, relying on artificial intelligence algorithms to optimize cost efficiency and minimize administrative overhead. Human oversight was minimal, concentrated among a few high-level bureaucrats who rarely questioned the AI recommendations as long as the quarterly profit margins stayed within acceptable parameters. The encouraging part was that the automation created vulnerabilities. AI systems were powerful but predictable, following programmed decision trees that could be manipulated if you understood their underlying logic. The terrifying part was the sheer scale of the operation. The 43 children from Sector 7 were just a tiny fraction of the thousands being processed every month across the Terran administrative zone. Marcus spent his nights coding while Emma slept, building small programs that could hide in the quantum noise of the network's background traffic. His tools were primitive by the standards he'd once worked with, but the principles remained the same. Information was power, and the hegemony had grown complacent about protecting their information from threats they didn't consider credible. On the 4th day, Marcus had his breakthrough. The transport scheduling system wasn't actually managed by the hegemony military. It was contracted out to a civilian logistics company called Zirian Interstellar Freight, which also handled shipping for hundreds of other clients across dozens of star systems. The same transport vessels that would carry the orphans to their fate also carried luxury goods, raw materials, and passenger traffic for wealthy alien tourists. More importantly, the scheduling system used a legacy protocol that had been grandfathered in from an older network architecture. The encryption was strong, but it relied on authentication keys that were automatically renewed every 72 hours through a process that involved temporary identity tokens passed between distributed validation servers. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. He'd written papers on attacks against distributed authentication systems. The theory was elegant: if you could insert false data into the validation process at precisely the right moment, you could create legitimate authentication credentials for non-existent entities. And if you could do that, you could make the system believe that anything was authorized, anything was legitimate, anything was supposed to happen. On the fifth day, the day before the transport was scheduled to arrive, Marcus made his move. He waited until the night shift rotation, when the monitoring stations were staffed by bored technicians who rarely paid attention to routine system maintenance alerts. Then, he deployed his carefully crafted code into the network. The beauty of the attack was its subtlety. Marcus didn't try to shut down the system or steal obvious information. Instead, he made small changes to the transport manifest database, introducing what appeared to be routine clerical corrections. The 43 children from Sector 7 were still scheduled for transport, but their destination had been quietly altered. According to the updated records, they were now classified as skilled technical apprentices being transferred to a training facility on Kepler Station, a civilian research outpost near the edge of hegemony space. The work assignment codes had been changed to indicate educational rather than industrial placement, with corresponding adjustments to their projected economic value and mortality risk assessments. It was a temporary solution at best. Eventually someone would notice the discrepancies, probably within a few weeks. But it would buy time, and time was what Marcus needed most. As dawn broke over Sector 7, Marcus watched the transport ship descend from orbit. It was a massive cargo hauler, its hull scarred from decades of use. The kind of ship that carried freight and passengers across the galaxy without anyone paying much attention to the manifest details. The children were loaded aboard with the same casual efficiency used for any other cargo. Marcus stood with the other observers, forcing himself to remain calm as he watched 43 young lives disappear into the ship's cargo holds. Director Kralfak processed the transfer paperwork with mechanical precision, his scales displaying the steady gray of routine bureaucracy. As the transport lifted off and vanished into the morning sky, Marcus allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. The children were safe, at least for now. But this was only the beginning of what he had planned. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in the next room, Marcus began working on Phase 2. The hegemony thought they understood humans, thought they could predict and control every aspect of human behavior. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Marcus had spent 45 years learning how systems worked, how to find the hidden patterns in complex networks, how to exploit the assumptions that programmers and administrators never questioned. The hegemony's control of humanity was just another system, and every system had vulnerabilities. The orphans had been saved, but there were thousands more children across dozens of worlds who needed help. Millions of humans living under the crushing weight of alien domination, told that resistance was futile and compliance was survival. Marcus intended to prove them wrong. He intended to show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, their ability to find hope in the darkest circumstances, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the people they loved. The hegemony had made their choice when they decided to sell children like livestock. Now Marcus was making his. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and it would be fought not with ships and weapons, but with the one thing the aliens had never understood about his species: human ingenuity. 3 weeks after the transport disappeared into the void, Marcus received confirmation that his plan had worked better than expected. The children had arrived safely at Kepler Station, where a confused but compassionate research administrator named Dr. Veltar had accepted them as legitimate technical apprentices despite having no record of requesting such personnel. By the time anyone questioned the transfer, the kids were already integrated into the station's educational programs and protected by hegemony child welfare regulations that even the Commerce Authority hesitated to challenge directly. But Marcus knew that small victory had also started a clock ticking. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of hegemony space, algorithms were beginning to notice anomalies. Data auditors would eventually trace the altered records back to their source. He had perhaps 2 months before his involvement became impossible to hide. 2 months to do something that mattered on a scale larger than 43 children. Marcus had been using his access privileges to explore deeper into the hegemony's information networks, mapping connections between systems he'd never suspected existed. What he discovered both thrilled and terrified him. The aliens had built their empire on the assumption that conquered species would remain passive, accepting their designated roles without question. As a result, their security protocols focused primarily on external threats, rival alien powers, space pirates, natural disasters, and economic competition. The possibility of organized resistance from within had been largely overlooked. This oversight had created an extraordinary opportunity. The same communication networks that allowed the hegemony to coordinate their vast empire could potentially be used to coordinate resistance against it. If someone could find a way to reach other humans across multiple star systems, to share information and organize collective action, the results could be devastating to alien control. The challenge was making contact without triggering the automated monitoring systems that watched for signs of sedition. Marcus needed to find humans who shared his willingness to resist, but he needed to do it in a way that appeared completely innocent to algorithmic surveillance. His solution came from an unexpected source, his daughter Emma. "Dad, why don't humans ever win in the entertainment programs?" she asked one evening as they watched the approved family programming on their wall screen. The show featured a brave hegemony patrol ship defending innocent civilians from space pirates, with human characters serving in minor supporting roles as grateful rescued victims. "What do you mean, sweetheart? In all the stories, humans always need to be saved by aliens. Don't humans ever save themselves?" Marcus paused the program, studying his daughter's face. At 8 years old, she was already questioning the narrative that surrounded their daily lives. "What do you think should happen in those stories?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think humans should be smart enough to solve their own problems. Like in the old movies you showed me about Earth history. Humans used to be the heroes of their own stories." The old movies. Marcus had a collection of pre-conquest human entertainment media, carefully preserved on encrypted storage devices. Films about human explorers, inventors, rebels, and heroes. Stories that the hegemony allowed as historical curiosities but didn't actively promote. Emma had grown up watching them in secret, developing a sense of human potential that most children of her generation never experienced. That night, Marcus began developing what he privately called the Story Project. Using his network access, he identified the entertainment distribution systems that delivered approved content to human populations across multiple worlds. The algorithms that managed these systems were designed to maximize engagement while promoting hegemony values, automatically adjusting content based on audience response patterns. What if those audience response patterns could be manipulated to promote different values? Marcus began creating what appeared to be simple reviews and discussion posts about the historical human entertainment content. His comments were carefully crafted to seem like innocent nostalgia while actually containing coded information about resistance activities. Someone reading casually would see thoughtful analysis of old movies and books. Someone looking for the hidden message would find coordinates, timing information, and instructions for secure communication. The beauty of the system was that it used the hegemony's own distribution networks to spread resistance messaging. The algorithms actually helped, automatically recommending Marcus's reviews to humans who showed interest in historical Earth content. Within weeks, he was receiving coded responses from across the Terran administrative zone. The responses revealed a reality that gave Marcus hope for the first time in years. Humans everywhere were quietly resisting in small ways. Maintenance workers were introducing subtle flaws into alien equipment. Agricultural specialists were developing crop strains that produced lower yields than reported, allowing them to secretly distribute extra food to needy families. Data clerks were altering records to protect fellow humans from reassignment to dangerous work details. But these individual acts of resistance were isolated and ineffective against the larger system. What Marcus proposed was something far more ambitious: a coordinated network of resistance cells that could share information, resources, and strategic planning across multiple star systems. The first real test came when Marcus received a coded message from someone calling himself Phoenix on the mining world of Kepler 442b. Phoenix reported that local children were being systematically removed from families and placed in productivity enhancement programs that were essentially slavery with a different name. The situation was urgent, and the local resistance cell needed technical support to disrupt the selection process. Marcus faced a critical decision. Helping Phoenix would require revealing more of his capabilities and accepting greater risk of exposure. But it would also prove whether his network could actually accomplish meaningful change. He chose to act. Using techniques similar to those he'd employed to save the orphans, Marcus infiltrated the administrative systems managing the Kepler 442b child selection program. But this time he was more ambitious. Instead of simply redirecting the transport manifest, he introduced systematic errors into the psychological evaluation algorithms used to identify suitable candidates. The computer systems began flagging children as unsuitable for program participation based on fabricated behavioral assessments and medical conditions. Parents received official notifications that their children had been classified as requiring extended family support due to developmental concerns. The bureaucratic language was meaningless, but the result was that families stayed together. Phoenix reported complete success. Over 200 children had been protected, and the local administrators were too embarrassed by the high rejection rate to investigate the cause thoroughly. More importantly, other resistance cells had taken notice. Marcus began receiving requests for assistance from human networks across dozens of worlds. Each operation taught him more about the hegemony's vulnerabilities. The aliens relied heavily on automated systems that could be fooled by anyone who understood their underlying logic. Their human administrators were typically demoralized and focused on meeting quotas rather than investigating anomalies. Their security protocols assumed that resistance would take the form of obvious criminal activity rather than subtle systemic manipulation. Over the following months, Marcus's network grew exponentially. Resistance cells emerged in research facilities, agricultural installations, manufacturing complexes, and mining operations. Each cell operated with careful independence, but they shared information and coordinated timing through the disguised entertainment review system. The operations became increasingly sophisticated. A cell on Vega Prime developed techniques for introducing false data into economic planning models, causing resource allocation errors that favored human communities. Engineers on Proxima Centauri began installing hidden backdoors in industrial control systems, creating the potential for coordinated sabotage if open rebellion ever became necessary. Agricultural specialists across multiple worlds started developing seed banks of earth crops that could survive in alien environments, preparing for the possibility of establishing independent human colonies. But, as the network grew, so did the risks. Marcus noticed increased scrutiny of communication patterns from automated monitoring systems. Security audits were becoming more frequent and more thorough. Most worrying of all, some resistance cells had stopped responding to coded messages, suggesting they might have been discovered and eliminated. The crisis came from an unexpected source. Emma had been selected for advanced education placement at an off-world facility specializing in cultural integration studies. The notification described it as a tremendous opportunity for a promising young human to receive elite alien education and eventually join the administrative class that governed human populations. Marcus read between the lines. They were taking his daughter to turn her into a collaborator, someone who would help maintain alien control over her own species. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone suspected his activities and wanted leverage over him. Standing in his small apartment, holding the transfer notification while Emma slept peacefully in the next room, Marcus realized he faced an impossible choice. He could accept the placement, allowing Emma to be taken and indoctrinated while he continued his resistance activities. Or he could refuse, exposing himself to investigation and, likely arrest, but keeping his daughter safe in the short term. Neither choice was acceptable. Marcus made a third choice, one that would transform the nature of his resistance movement from hidden sabotage to open revolution. He activated emergency protocols he'd spent months preparing, sending coded signals to every resistance cell in his network. The message was simple: Phoenix rises. Execute Prometheus. Prometheus was the code name for a coordinated attack on the hegemony's information infrastructure. Every cell that had gained access to critical systems would simultaneously introduce maximum disruption. Power grids would fail, communication networks would crash, transportation systems would malfunction, and administrative databases would be corrupted beyond repair. The attacks were designed to look like random system failures rather than coordinated sabotage, but the cumulative effect would be devastating. Across dozens of worlds, the carefully maintained order of the hegemony would collapse into chaos. But Marcus wasn't planning to just strike and hide. He was planning to use the chaos as cover for something unprecedented: the mass evacuation of human children from hegemony space. The Entertainment Review Network had allowed him to identify and contact sympathetic aliens, members of client species who had their own grievances against hegemony rule. Some were traders with access to independent transport vessels. Others were administrators who controlled remote facilities that could serve as temporary refuges. A few were even military personnel who had grown disgusted with their government's policies. During the confusion of Prometheus, these allies would help evacuate thousands of human children to neutral space, beyond the reach of hegemony retribution. The children would be taken to worlds where they could grow up free, maintaining human culture and, eventually returning to liberate their families. It was an audacious plan that would certainly fail in most of its objectives. But, even partial success would save more lives than Marcus could protect through continued hidden resistance. And, it would send a message that humans were not the passive, defeated species the hegemony believed them to be. As Marcus prepared to implement Prometheus, he realized that the Orphans sale that had started this journey had been a gift in disguise. It had forced him to choose between acceptance and resistance, between safety and principle. The hegemony's casual cruelty had awakened something in him that decades of oppression had failed to destroy. The aliens had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They thought that controlling human bodies and human resources was enough to control the human spirit. They were about to learn that a species which had evolved through millions of years of struggle against impossible odds was not easily defeated. Marcus looked at Emma's door one last time, then activated the Prometheus protocol. Across the galaxy, resistance cells received their final orders. The quiet war was about to become very loud indeed. The first systems began failing at exactly 0300 Galactic Standard Time across 17 different star systems. To the hegemony's artificial intelligence monitoring networks, it appeared to be an unprecedented cascade of random technical malfunctions. Power generators experienced spontaneous control system failures. Communication relays suffered mysterious synchronization errors. Transportation networks ground to a halt as routing algorithms began producing impossible instructions. Marcus watched the chaos unfold from his workstation, monitoring emergency response communications as they flooded the quantum channels. Hegemony administrators were panicking, unable to understand how so many critical systems could fail simultaneously across such vast distances. They sent repair teams, deployed backup equipment, and activated emergency protocols, but every solution only seemed to create new problems. What they couldn't see was the hidden pattern beneath the chaos. Every failure had been carefully orchestrated to create specific windows of opportunity. When the power grid on Kepler 442b went dark, it took the biometric security scanners offline at the local administrative center. When the communication relays on Vega Prime started broadcasting random noise, it jammed the tracking systems used to monitor human movement. When the transportation networks crashed on Proxima Centauri, it grounded the patrol ships that would have responded to unusual activity at the spaceport. Marcus had spent months studying the interdependencies between different systems, mapping the cascade effects that would result from precisely timed disruptions. The hegemony's efficiency had become their weakness, they were so dependent on automated coordination that they had no effective fallback procedures for widespread system failures. Phase 1 of Prometheus had worked better than he had dared to hope. Now came the dangerous part. Emma woke up to find her father sitting on the edge of her bed, already dressed and holding a travel bag. The apartment's lights were flickering erratically, and strange sounds echoed from the corridor outside. "Dad? What's happening?" "We're going on a trip, sweetheart. Remember the stories I told you about human explorers who went to new worlds to build better lives?" Emma nodded, still groggy from sleep. "Like the pioneers?" "Exactly like the pioneers. We're going to be pioneers too." Marcus helped her get dressed quickly, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was attempting. "But we need to be very quiet and very brave, okay?" Outside their apartment, the corridors of Sector 7 were in chaos. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as humans stumbled through the darkness, confused by the simultaneous failure of multiple building systems. Security drones hovered overhead, but their coordination algorithms were malfunctioning, causing them to fly in aimless circles rather than maintaining organized patrols. Marcus let Emma through maintenance passages he'd memorized during his months of preparation. The route took them away from the main residential areas and toward the industrial district, where the real work of Prometheus was beginning. At the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the manufacturing complex, Marcus found the others waiting. 47 adults and children from across Sector 7, all members of the local resistance cell that had grown around the Entertainment Review Network. Parents with their children, elderly humans who remembered Earth before the conquest, young adults who had grown up under alien rule but never accepted it as permanent. Maria Vasquez, the teenage orphan who had helped organize the younger children, stepped forward as their group's spokesperson. At 16, she had already seen more hardship than most humans experienced in a lifetime, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. "Are you sure about this, Professor?" she asked, using the title someone had discovered from Marcus's pre-conquest records. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Marcus looked at the assembled group, families who had trusted him with their lives, people who had chosen to risk everything for the chance at freedom. "The transport ships are already moving into position. If we don't act now, we'll never get another opportunity like this." The transportation phase of Prometheus required precise timing and considerable luck. Sympathetic allies throughout hegemony space were positioning cargo vessels and passenger ships to appear in seemingly random locations, all ostensibly responding to the chaos caused by the system failures. But each ship was actually following carefully coordinated instructions, creating an evacuation network that stretched across dozens of star systems. Captain Zexhai of the merchant vessel Stellar Wanderer was one of Marcus's most valuable allies. A member of the Kethmori species, Zexhai had lost his own homeworld to hegemony economic integration 30 years earlier. His people had been scattered across the galaxy as indentured workers, their culture systematically erased in the name of efficient resource allocation. He understood exactly what the humans were fighting to prevent. "The cargo bay modifications are complete," Zexhai reported through encrypted channels that rode in the quantum noise of the failing communication networks. "We can accommodate up to 200 passengers in concealed compartments. Life support will be basic but adequate for a 7-day journey to neutral space." Similar reports came from other Allied vessels across the evacuation network. Modified freighters, passenger ships with hidden compartments, even military vessels whose crews had been recruited to the resistance cause. The hegemony's vast size meant that thousands of ships moved through their space every day, making it impossible to monitor all traffic even under normal circumstances. During the chaos of Prometheus, the surveillance systems were completely overwhelmed. Marcus's group made their way through the darkened industrial complex toward the spaceport, following routes mapped by members of the resistance who worked in cargo handling and ship maintenance. The journey took 3 hours through maintenance tunnels, abandoned buildings, and shipping corridors where security coverage had always been minimal. They weren't the only ones moving. Across Sector 7, other groups were making similar journeys to different extraction points. The orphanage children who had been saved 3 months earlier were being evacuated from Kepler Station by a research vessel that was supposedly responding to an emergency equipment failure. Families from the agricultural zones were boarding transport ships that claimed to be emergency food distribution vessels responding to the power grid failures. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. For the first time since the conquest, humans were acting collectively across multiple star systems, coordinating their efforts through the hidden networks that Marcus had helped create. They were no longer isolated victims accepting their fate. They had become an organized resistance movement capable of strategic planning and coordinated action. But the hegemony was beginning to notice patterns in the chaos. High Admiral Kexthal of the Hegemony Security Forces was the first to recognize that the system failures showed signs of intelligent coordination. Unlike his subordinates, who were focused on individual technical problems, Kexthal had spent decades fighting organized resistance movements throughout the galaxy. He knew the difference between random equipment failures and carefully orchestrated sabotage. The timing patterns are too precise, he reported to the Emergency Command Council that had been hastily convened to address the crisis. The failures are creating specific tactical advantages for coordinated movement. We are dealing with an organized resistance operation. The revelation sent shockwaves through the hegemony's leadership. For over 50 years, they had maintained control over hundreds of worlds and dozens of species through a combination of military supremacy and administrative efficiency. The possibility that conquered populations could organize effective resistance had been dismissed as theoretically impossible given the surveillance and control systems in place. "What species are we dealing with?" demanded Supreme Administrator Valkorian. "Which of our client races has developed this capability?" Kexthal's response was even more disturbing than the questions. Based on the attack vectors and technical signatures, the resistance appears to be primarily human. The silence in the chamber was profound. Humans were considered the least threatening of all the conquered species. They had been defeated so quickly and completely that they were classified as minimal security risk in all administrative protocols. The idea that humans could organize and execute a galaxy-wide resistance operation challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which the hegemony had built its empire. "Impossible," Valkorian declared. "Human technological capabilities are insufficient for this level of coordination. They must be receiving assistance from external powers." But, as reports continued to arrive from across hegemony space, it became clear that humans were indeed responsible for the chaos. Security cameras in working condition showed human groups moving through industrial areas with clear purpose and organization. Communication intercepts revealed coordination between human resistance cells across multiple star systems. Most alarming of all, the technical signatures of the sabotage attacks demonstrated intimate knowledge of hegemony systems that could only have been gained through decades of careful study. The hegemony had been infiltrated and systematically compromised by the species they considered most harmless. Admiral Kexthal immediately began deploying military assets to regain control, but the scope of the crisis overwhelmed even the hegemony's vast resources. Every star system in the Terran administrative zone was experiencing simultaneous emergencies. Military units were spread too thin to provide effective response, and the communication failures made coordination between different forces nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the evacuation continued with desperate efficiency. Marcus's group reached the spaceport just as Captain Zexhi's ship completed its docking procedures. The Stellar Wanderer appeared to be a standard cargo hauler delivering emergency supplies, but hidden compartments throughout the vessel had been converted into passenger space for evacuees. Loading the families required careful choreography. Small groups moved from the maintenance tunnels to the cargo holds in precise intervals, timing their movements to avoid the malfunctioning security drones and confused patrol units. Emma stayed close to Marcus throughout the process, her eyes wide with excitement and terror as she watched her father orchestrate the most audacious escape attempt in human history. "Where are we going?" she whispered as they settled into one of the hidden compartments. "Somewhere the aliens can't follow," Marcus replied. "Somewhere we can be free." The compartment filled with other evacuees, Maria and 6 other teenagers from the orphanage, the Patel family from the manufacturing district, elderly Mrs. Chen who remembered Earth's forests, and dozens of others who had chosen uncertain freedom over certain oppression. They held their children close and tried not to think about the family members and friends they were leaving behind. As the Stellar Wanderer lifted off from the spaceport, Marcus monitored emergency communications to track the hegemony's response. Military units were beginning to restore order in some areas, but the damage had been done. Thousands of humans had disappeared from dozens of worlds, spirited away to neutral space by a network the aliens were only beginning to comprehend. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The evacuation had saved lives, but it had also revealed the existence of organized human resistance to the hegemony leadership. There would be retaliation, investigations, and systematic efforts to eliminate any remaining resistance networks. The humans who had been evacuated would need to build new lives in neutral space, far from hegemony control. More importantly, they would need to prepare for the day when they could return to liberate their people still trapped under alien rule. As the ship jumped to hyperspace and left hegemony territory behind, Marcus began planning for that day. The first phase of the resistance had been about survival and escape. The next phase would be about building the strength needed for liberation. The hegemony had underestimated humanity once. Marcus intended to make sure they never got the chance to do so again. The refugee fleet emerged from hyperspace in the Kepler 1649 system, a collection of worlds that existed in the narrow band of neutral space between hegemony territory and the domain of their primary rival, the Zephyrian Collective. Here, among three barely habitable planets that neither galactic power considered worth claiming, humanity would attempt to build something that hadn't existed for over 50 years, a free human civilization. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Stellar Wanderer, watching as 47 other ships dropped out of hyperspace around them. The evacuation had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes. Over 12,000 humans had been extracted from hegemony space, along with sympathetic aliens who had chosen to join their cause. Children who would have been sold into slavery, families who would have been separated, intellectuals who would have been indoctrinated into serving their conquerors. Emma pressed against the viewport beside him, her eyes wide with wonder at the sight of three blue-green worlds spinning slowly in the system's orange light. "Are those going to be our new homes, Dad?" "If we can make them work," Marcus replied. The worlds were marginally habitable, with thin but breathable atmospheres and basic ecosystems that could support human life. But they were raw, undeveloped, and utterly lacking in the infrastructure that 12,000 refugees would need to survive. The next 6 months tested every aspect of human ingenuity and determination. The refugees had managed to escape with minimal supplies and equipment, relying on what they could carry in their hidden compartments and what their alien allies could provide without drawing suspicion. Building a civilization from essentially nothing required solving thousands of problems simultaneously. Maria Vasquez proved to be a natural leader among the younger refugees, organizing work crews and resource distribution with the same fierce efficiency she had shown at the orphanage. Her experience managing children in desperate circumstances translated remarkably well to managing adults in similar situations. She established the first permanent settlement on Kepler 1649c, choosing a location near freshwater sources and geologically stable ground that could support major construction. "We're going to call it New Haven," she announced to the gathered refugees during one of their first community meetings. "Because that's what this is, a haven where humans can be human again." The name stuck, and New Haven became the capital of what the refugees started calling the Free Worlds. But building a functioning society required more than just enthusiasm and determination. It required technology, industrial capacity, and scientific knowledge that the evacuees had only begun to accumulate. Marcus found himself appointed as the informal chief of technology development, a role that drew on both his pre-conquest expertise and his recent experience with hegemony systems. His first priority was establishing communication networks that could coordinate activities across the three worlds while remaining undetectable to external observers. The solution came from an unexpected source, the entertainment review system that had originally allowed him to contact resistance cells throughout hegemony space. The same quantum encryption techniques could be adapted to create a completely secure communication network for the free worlds, using natural cosmic background radiation to hide their signals from surveillance. But communication was only the beginning. The refugees needed food production, manufacturing capability, defense systems, and educational facilities. Most challenging of all, They needed to accomplish all of this while remaining hidden from both the hegemony and the Zephyrian collective, either of which would view an independent human civilization as a potential threat. The key to solving these challenges lay in the diverse skills and knowledge that the refugees had brought with them. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been evacuated from an agricultural research facility on Vega Prime, began developing crop varieties that could thrive in the alien soil conditions of the free worlds. Engineer Thomas Okafor, formerly a slave laborer in hegemony shipyards, started building manufacturing facilities using salvaged components and innovative designs that required minimal raw materials. But perhaps the most crucial contributor was someone Marcus had never expected: Director Kralthak, the Vectani administrator who had overseen the orphanage in Sector 7. Kralthak had arrived with the refugees, much to everyone's surprise. In the final hours before the evacuation, he had made a choice that astonished even Marcus. Rather than report the suspicious activities he had begun to notice, Kralthak had quietly destroyed the administrative records that would have allowed the hegemony to track the missing children and had requested transfer to the evacuation ships. "I have spent 40 years implementing policies that destroyed families and crushed dreams," he explained to the Refugee Council during his first community meeting. "I cannot undo the harm I have caused, but perhaps I can help build something better." Kralthak's intimate knowledge of hegemony administrative systems proved invaluable for protecting the free worlds from discovery. He taught the refugees how to create false identity records, how to manipulate cargo manifests to hide resource shipments, and how to exploit bureaucratic procedures to delay investigations. His species' natural ability to interface with quantum computing systems also made him an invaluable assistant in developing the technological infrastructure the settlements needed. The cultural integration wasn't always smooth. Some refugees struggled to trust an alien who had been part of the system that oppressed them, regardless of his subsequent choices. Others worried that his presence would make them vulnerable to infiltration or betrayal. But Kralthak's consistent dedication to the community gradually won over most skeptics, and his contributions became essential to their survival. As the settlements grew and prospered, Marcus began developing longer-term plans for human liberation. The free worlds were safe for now, but they remained vulnerable and isolated. The 12,000 refugees represented only a tiny fraction of humanity still trapped under hegemony rule.